All right, what's up, guys? Nito here, and welcome back to another episode of Noteworthy Interactions. And that's right, this time we are messing around with a Deadeye Rupture Summon Reaper build. So, the idea here is to use the Rupturing node from Deadeye, which causes the critical strikes that you deal that also inflict bleeding to apply a Rupture debuff to the enemy. And the Rupture debuff can stack 3 times, and each stack causes the enemy to take 25% more damage from bleeding, and bleeds on them expire 25% more quickly. So the idea here is that we are going to be attacking ourselves with our bow. We are going to be critting. Our crits are going to apply bleeds. Those bleeds are going to apply ruptures. And then the Summon Reaper has a built-in 50% chance to bleed, and gets up to 100% more damage with bleeding. So we're just basically scaling the minion bleed damage, and also applying bleeds ourselves, although our bleeds do no damage. Like, we don't care about our own bleed damage at all. We just care about the minion's bleed damage. So we're really just there to debuff the enemy and let the minion do all the work. We're also using some marks. So currently I'm using Poacher's Mark, which is going to make the enemy take some extra physical damage. And it's also going to give us a lot of life recovery on hit, which is great. And then Tailwind is also going to apply to our minion, so it's going to speed up our Reaper. And then we use Wind Ward to just take some less damage because we're attacking frequently. So we're going to get lots of stacks of Gale Force. And that's just going to be a nice defensive layer for us. So currently I am using this bow right here, which at first glance you might think, holy crap, this must be, hundreds of exalts, craft, or whatever. I bought this explody bow base for 70 chaos. They are incredibly cheap this league for some reason. I don't know why. I guess they're more common with some of the new Atlas passives and stuff. But yeah, very cheap, just to get started anyways. And I crafted this bow, including the 6 link. It probably took around 6 exalts to craft, although I think I got a little lucky crafting it. It might cost a little more than that if you try to repeat this process, but basically the process was to just spam the essences to get the minion damage mod on there, and just spam a couple till you hit a critical strike chance suffix, and then you craft prefixes cannot be changed, and you do an Ashling Unveil, and you just hope that you get the trigger mod on there, which I got on the first try, and luckily it removed the prefixes cannot be changed mod, and not the crit chance mod. If you hit the crit chance mod, you kind of have to start over. And then after that, you just craft on minion attack speed and you're done. The fire and cold damage on there really don't matter at all for this build. It helps a little bit, I guess, because the cold damage, since we're attacking ourselves, we can chill enemies when we're attacking with our bow. But for the most part, it's not really important. Really, you just want the minion stuff on there and the trigger mod. And I'll explain the trigger stuff in a second. But yeah, that's the most important part. So the idea behind using a trigger weapon is that Summon Reaper. So if I just have the Reaper, when you use the skill, it first summons the Reaper, and then when you use it again, it's going to cause the Reaper to do a slash attack.
I'm not up to that just yet.
And it's going to go wherever you're aiming. So like it's going to go towards my mouse here. So you can kind of control where the Reaper goes. And that slash attack is going to do big damage, and it's going to apply your biggest bleed. Oh, we got some enemies over here. So the Reaper will kind of run around and do its own thing. Like he has other moves besides the slash attack. But the slash attack is what's going to be our biggest bleed. So we really want to be using that for most of our damage. By default, that attack has a 4-second cooldown. However, if we use the Divergent Summon Reaper, we can get 20% increased cooldown recovery rate from quality. And then, because I'm also using the new amulet Ashes of the Stars, we get an additional 30% quality of all skill gems. So that's going to apply and give us 50% cooldown recovery rate. There's also an additional 30% cooldown recovery rate you can get on a helmet enchant. I currently have the increased damage enchant instead. Just because I wasn't able to find that cooldown recovery rate helmet enchant, but if I could get it, I definitely would, because you really do want the lowest possible cooldown for that slash attack in order for this build to feel good. I also have some cooldown recovery rate crafted in my belt and a little bit on my implicit for my boots. So right now we're at a 2.38 second cooldown, but if you have that helm enchant, you can bring it all the way down to 2 seconds, and maybe even a little lower if you get a better, like a non-crafted cooldown recovery rate belt. Like that mod can go a little higher, and I think this implicit can also go a little higher, so you can get a little bit lower than 2 seconds, I believe. I'm not using enhance or anything to improve the quality further. I'm just using the 20 quality gem and the amulet. But, you know, if you really wanted to invest in the quality, you could. And you could, you know, push it down even further. But I don't think it's worth it. So, yeah. So basically the idea is that if you have Reaper in a trigger weapon, that all of that cooldown recovery rate is actually going to apply to the trigger cooldown as well, which is also 4 seconds. So we're actually able to trigger on a 2.38 second cooldown while we're attacking with other attacks. So right now, the way it works is I'm attacking with other stuff, and you know the Reaper is just going to do his own thing, and then he's going to slash whenever, you know, whenever it comes off cooldown. So I don't have to really manually control the Reaper at all. He just kind of like goes wherever I'm shooting. And as you can see, there's a couple different attacks happening here. So my main skill that I'm shooting is the ensnaring arrow. And ensnaring arrow is very good for bleed builds because it causes the enemy to be considered moving, which is kind of counterintuitive because it actually slows the enemy down, but it forces the it basically makes the enemy be considered moving for the sake of bleeding, and bleed does a lot more damage when the enemy is moving. Unless you have Crimson Dance, but because we're using a minion, minions can't get Crimson Dance. So making sure that the enemy is moving, even if it's actually stationary, like a stationary boss, you're going to deal way more damage. So ensnaring arrow is very important here. We're also linking it to main support, which causes enemies to take increased physical damage. Again, that's great for bleed. And then we're using a Maloney's Mechanism quiver, which is going to trigger a second attack whenever we're attacking with the ensnaring arrow. And in this case, I'm triggering Rain of Arrows with life gain on hit support and Mirage Archer so that it just kind of keeps shooting. Otherwise, it only triggers once per second. So the idea behind Rain of Arrows is that, you know, it hits basically the whole screen, and it hits multiple times because there's a lot of arrows. So it's going to hit quickly. It's going to hopefully crit a bunch of times. It's going to hopefully apply a bunch of bleeds and then a bunch of rupture stacks. And it's also going to give us a bunch of life recovery from life gain on hit support, as well as from our mark on hit Poacher's Mark. So this is also automated. And Poacher's Mark also has, from quality, you get 12% chance to grant a frenzy charge when hit. So that's also going to work for our minion. So our minion's going to be able to gain frenzy charges, which are very powerful, and will also increase the minion's bleed damage. So that's basically the idea. It's quite smooth to play because it's basically a one-button build. Even though there's multiple different skills happening, I'm just using the one ensnaring arrow myself. And then the other thing we're using is our movement skill is Blink Arrow. And it's important that we're using Blink Arrow and not something like Flame Dash or any of these other movement skills. The reason it's very important to use Blink Arrow is because Blink Arrow is a minion skill. So Blink Arrow is going to, of course, summon a clone of us, and that clone counts as a minion, and it's going to trigger all of our, if you've used a minion recently, or a minion skill recently effects. So for example, minions have 15% increased area of effect if you've used a minion skill recently. Triggering does not count as using a skill, so that doesn't work. But since we're using Ensnaring Arrow as our main movement, Blink Arrow as our main movement, that is going to count as using a minion skill recently. So that's very important. The other thing is that Reaper likes to eat your minions. So the Reaper is going to cause all your other minions to deal less damage and have less maximum life, and he's going to occasionally consume minions to heal himself and to get a little buff that, you know, I think it's like 40% increased damage or something like that. So it's not a huge buff, but it'll buff itself by consuming some of your minions. So the Reaper will occasionally, if he's damaged, he would probably consume this minion and heal himself. And so that's another nice little bonus you get. And then the last thing is that we're linking it to Feeding Frenzy support, just to get the Feeding Frenzy buff when our Blink Arrow minion is hitting stuff. So that's a global buff, so that's going to affect all our minions, including the Reaper. So that's just like a nice little way to use the Blink Arrow, and we're also using a Phantasmal Blink Arrow, which gets extra cooldown uses, and then it gets a bonus one from our amulet. So we have 3 cooldown uses, so it actually feels quite good to use, even with no significant investment into additional cooldown recovery or anything like that. And then the other thing I'll point out is that the Reaper slash attack costs 250 mana every time you used it, so it's actually very heavy mana cost because of that. because of the fact that we're reserving most of our mana pool with auras. We're using the Devouring Diadem to get Eldritch Battery. That means we can use our energy shield instead of mana, and most of our mana pool is coming from the crafted mod on our chest. 10% of max life as extra maximum energy shield, and that's just going to make it so that we don't really have to worry about mana issues at all. And a couple other things, I'll just go through the tree real quick. So down here we have this really nice Thread of Hope. We're hitting Wind Dancer, we're getting some suppression and move speed. We're hitting Master Fletcher for attack speed, accuracy, and prod speed. The accuracy here is very important because we want to make sure that we are hitting the enemy and critting them. And then King the Hill, also very important because of the crit chance. We don't care about crit multiplier at all. We just care about crit chance because we just want to apply our bleed and our rupture stacks. You can see right here, my rain of arrows currently has about a 24% crit chance, which is fine. You don't really need that much crit chance. You definitely don't need to be crit capped. Because we're hitting so frequently with rain of arrows, even with just 24% chance, you're going to be applying all 3 rupture stacks fairly easily. Because we're also attacking with another ability, Snaring Arrow, which is, we're attacking like 3 times a second with that as well. So you don't need a massive amount of crit investment. I think actually this is like one of the few crit nodes I even have on the tree. You can also use the crit support if you want. I couldn't really squeeze it in because I really wanted to get the life gain on hit support in there. You could maybe use it instead of Mirage Archer if you wanted. I don't think it's really necessary though. And then I will also point out that we're using this Mark Mastery. Enemies near your marked enemy are blinded. So I discovered that this actually also applies to the marked enemy itself. So it's going to blind the marked enemy too, which is really good because not only does it increase your evasion, but it also lowers the enemy's evasion too. So it's basically a multiplier to your accuracy. So you don't need to invest as much in accuracy for this build. But you can see I have roughly 90% chance to hit with, and then the blind on top of that should bring me close to 100. And I'm also running precision to give both me and my minions some extra accuracy and crit chance. And then on top of that, the other auras I'm running are Fury of Elements, Malevolence, Pride, Grace, and Precision. And then the rest of the tree is kind of just like picking up life, picking up, spell suppression, evasion, stuff like that. And we're coming up here, Brave Pact for accuracy. The double damage does not apply to bleeds, but the accuracy here is important, I think. And, we get Spiritual Aid, we get Spiritual Command, so that minion stats are applying to us. Just some aura stuff here, and then Minion Leech is kind of important for keeping the Reaper alive, and then AoE. And then right here we just have our single cluster, just a minion damage cluster, and currently only taking the Feasting Fiends passive, and just some more minion damage. We have a Fortress Covenant right here, and because it's in a a large cluster jewel right here, and it's not actually part of the tree, you can kind of bypass the downside of converting notables and making your minion take more damage. So this is a really good way to utilize this jewel if you didn't know about it. I think a lot of minion builds do this, but yeah, it's a very, very strong jewel because it has a ton of damage and the extra block chance for your minion. It helps keep your minions alive. But the downside is pretty significant. If you were to kind of like slot it in like over here, it would turn this into minions take increased damage, which is obviously very bad. And then the other really important thing for this build is we're using the Siege Cluster Jewel, which gives us kineticism. And kineticism makes it so that your attack projectiles always inflict bleeding and maim, and they knock back enemies, but they can't pierce, fork, or chain. So this is how we're getting our bleed chance. It just gives you 100% bleed chance. You don't need any bleed investment anywhere other than this. And then the maim chance is also very nice because the maim support we are using to apply to make the enemy take increased physical damage. And the knockback is also actually quite nice because it just helps keep enemies away from you. Sometimes it's kind of annoying because you'll knock enemies like further apart and it's harder for the Reaper to kill them all at once. But for the most part, it's quite good for keeping you alive. And you don't really care about Pierce, Fork, or Chain because, Rain of Arrows obviously doesn't care about any of those because it's a ground-targeted type of skill. It's not really the normal type of projectile. And then Ensnaring Arrow, you actually don't want Pierce because it only ensnares the final enemy hit. So if you Pierce or you Fork or you Chain or whatever, the initial enemy's hit aren't going to get the slowing effect and the extra bleeding damage taken. So that's one thing to be aware of there. So yeah, this keystone is very build enabling for this build. The other thing is we're using Gravebind for the nearby enemies killed by anyone count as being killed by you instead. That is how we're taking advantage of our explody mod on the bow, so that the Reaper kill stuff, it counts as our kills, and then that's going to cause the enemies to explode. Without this, the clear is definitely not very good because you have a single minion that you're trying to clear with, pretty much. We're not really running any other minions in this build other than our Blink Arrow, so you kind of really do need to use something like this in order to improve your clear speed. And then vulnerability on hit is also quite important because vulnerability is going to give extra bleed chance to our Reaper, and because chance to bleed support does not support minion skills and you only have a 50% base chance to inflict bleeding, it's definitely important to get the extra chance for vulnerability. And also you get a little bit more from the anomalous brutality. So yeah, I'm just going to show you this quick map. This is a Hydra map, and I'll show you what it looks like. So you can see our minion just kind of dives in as soon as we start attacking. Stuff starts exploding. It's pretty smooth playstyle because it's really just one button if you're not counting your movement skill. And occasionally you'll want to use Convocation to kind of just like reset your minion close to you. This Reaper does tend to kind of like go off on its own occasionally, especially because the dash can kind of like go very far sometimes. Like it can kind of just shoot across the screen like that, like he's way off screen now. So Convocation is a little useful here, but it's definitely not really required, I would say. Actually, I wasn't using it for most of the time I was playing this build, and I kind of just put it in at the very end, but it is a little useful. And as you can see, we are really limited by the 2-second cooldown of the slash attack. When he's not doing the slash attack, the clear speed is it's not great. Like, it definitely needs something else to feel really good, I would say. That's kind of like the one drawback of this build, I would say. Actually, that and I guess, sort of the general squishiness of playing a Deadeye Necromancer without, too much investment into things like evasion and spell suppression. I think I'm like 50% suppression right now. I think I could probably cap it if I get better gear. I just don't have it at the moment. And I think I'm at like 10k evasion or something without flasks, which is okay, but, you know, not great. So there are times that it does feel kind of frustrating because you do die to certain things. But we're ailment immune, so that's always nice. And our Reaper is ailment immune as well because it's an aura. And I have quite good chaos res and stuff like that, so overall it's not too bad in that department, but it's not, certainly not what I would call a tanky build. But it is a fun playstyle, I would say. It's kind of like, you know, you're kind of a puppet master, directing your puppet to murder things. That's always fun. Let's see if we can jump ahead to the boss here. Whoa. Let's see how this goes. I think Maven's on here.
I want this ancient power as part of my collective guild and fight on. Life is so brittle.
Oh, Maven's healing him.
Stalk and hunt. The guild and fight on.
No, stop healing. There we go. Alright. So, the boss DPS, it's pretty good, actually. It doesn't feel too bad for bossing, and, you know, you can kind of focus mostly on just, like, jumping around and dodging while your Reaper does all the work for you, so it's actually kind of a fun bossing build. But, like I said, the clearing is not amazing. But, you know, it does feel pretty good just because everything is really automated on this build. So, I like that part of it. Overall, my experience with Reaper has been pretty fun, I would say. I don't play too many minion builds. You know, I tend to just play them kind of once in a while, but Reaper has been pretty enjoyable, except for the clear speed. I definitely would prefer a faster clearing build. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.